Welcome back, everyone. Borno states in the northeast, Benue and Plateau states in the north central have been scattered by insecurity at the hands of jihadist group Boko Haram, ISWAP, and suspected herders. In Borno State, the governor Babagana Zulum raised the alarm over resurgence of terrorists after its fighters staged a series of attacks and seized control of some parts of the state. Meanwhile, in Benue, bodies identified as civil protection guards were ambushed and killed by suspected herders was discovered in Gwa West local government. And finally, in Plateau State, precisely Boko's local government, many people were killed, including women and children. In a bid to restore peace and security, the Inspector General of Police, Kadi Agbetokun, ordered immediate deployment of police tactical assets to the affected states. The Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Olufemi Oluyede, also assured of more troops into the state during a personal visit to Mango Council area of Plateau State. But what does all of these say about the state of insecurity in our country? Are the governors who are the chief security officers of your state helpless? Again, in situations like this, the call for state police comes to fore. But to help us understand the situation tonight is the CEO Beacon Consulting Limited, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Good evening, Dr. Adamu. Thank you very much for joining us on Politics Tonight.
My pleasure. Good evening.
Good evening to you. So you heard my introduction. What exactly is happening?
We just published our March 2025 Nigeria Security Report, which is an analysis of security trends that have occurred within the month of March. And I think it would be a good place to kind of give us a broad overview of what is happening. And then I can narrow down to the three things that you mentioned in your report. So from that broad sense of view, what we saw in March 2025 is that 1,300 persons died, unfortunately, within that month, which is an increase from the figure that we had for February 2025. In the case of abduction, 806 persons died, which is a decrease from the figure that we had in February 2025. And then when we broke that down to the various regions that we have in Nigeria, we saw that the Northwest had the highest figure for fatalities, which was 38%, and then followed by the Northeast, which was 34% of the 1,300 persons, and then followed by the southern, North Central and the 3,000 regions, which had about 10%. For abduction, the Northwest had the highest percent, which is 58% of the 806 that we recorded, followed by the North Central, which had 18.7%, and then followed by the North East, which had 13.28%. And then the southern regions, the three of them together, had about 9% thereabout. In terms of the distribution, according to the states, Zamfara State came highest with 208 persons abducted in the month of March, followed by Katsina, Borno, down to Niger, and then the other states. In terms of fatalities, Niger State had the highest with 368, followed by Zamfara, and then Borno State, and then, of course, the others would be Kebbi, Katsina, down to Benue, and then, of course, Sokoto State. So this is kind of a broad overview. Now, if we narrow it down to the three states that you mentioned in your report, what we saw, starting from Borno State, what we saw in Borno State is a resurgence of attacks by the two active terrorist groups that are present in Borno State. So you have the Islamic State in West Africa province. We saw 6 major attacks carried out by that group. And interestingly, before those attacks, it released statements. The bigger group, Islamic State, released statements which it published on its magazine, urging its members to carry out attacks. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing those attacks on our military formations. So at the moment, about 3 local governments are being challenged in terms of they are not being controlled by these terrorist groups, but they are constantly being challenged in terms of the control by our security forces and the state administration, as it were. Then when we moved down to Benue State, we saw...
Dr. Adamu, let's stay with Borno State before we move to Benue State and Plateau State. Because, for Borno State, we thought violent attacks of this nature had been de-escalated. So would you say this is a major setback?
It is a major setback, unfortunately, and this is in no way belittling the effort of the military and the government as a whole. It is just unfortunate that the oxygen that allows these groups to thrive, and that's their ability to recruit, their ability to gain funding from the different things that they do, as well as their ability to acquire weapons. As a country, we have not done very well in stopping these three things, even though we have the instruments that should have allowed us to stop this, but the implementation of those instruments have not been very active. So even though we're killing a significant number of their commanders, and we're seeing over 100,000 of the members and their families surrendering to the authorities, but because of these three things I've mentioned, you see occasional resurgence like the type that we're seeing at the moment. And I remember I said that the international body, IS, is also issuing statements where it's actually encouraging more attacks. And so we're not just dealing with a Nigerian problem, we're dealing with an international problem. And because of the frequency of the activities of these groups within the Sahel region, and because of the porosity of our borders, and add to it the geopolitical complexities, the exit of Niger, as it were, from the multinational joint task force, the fact that Chad is also, unfortunately, we're not sure of its commitment at the moment. So all of this is adding to that complexity that led to the urgence that we're seeing at the moment. Another factor, which is something we're currently studying, is the possibility that the Nigerian military's concentration in the Northeast has been reduced as a result of the new frontier of operation that has opened up in the Northwest at the moment. Remember that there is a new operation in the Northwest, which is Operation Fansanyama, and a significant percentage of the assets of the Nigerian military has moved to that operation. Add that to the ongoing operations in the Niger Delta against oil theft. So we're dealing with a situation where the Nigerian military is focused on different fronts. And so the likelihood of occasional letdowns in some fronts is a possibility, sadly.
All right, just as you said, Dr. Adamu, this is a major setback for Borno State and by extension, the Northeast in general, and calls for serious action, rightfully stated by the governor. Borno State kicked off the year with harrowing experiences from armed criminal groups who continue to pose a threat to the region. And I remember that in January, the statement released by Major General Edward Buba indicated that the terrorists had attempted to surprise troops and retaliated the recent killing of their commander and combatants by troops. I don't know if you remember that. Also, battle damage assessments revealed several killed terrorists and recovered weapons troops. Reinforcement team also encountered improvised explosive devices, injuring the vigilante commander. The air component of Operation Hardin K conducted air interdiction on the fleeing terrorists. What's your evaluation of the current state of Nigeria's defense capabilities? And what specific measures are you advocating to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of our security forces?
So I believe we have a competent and capable military force. I also believe that the military force is doing its best. It's dealing with multifaceted, complex challenges. In some instances, it's having to play catch-up. As an example, the nature of the insurgency and modern methodology of attack by the non-state armed groups is something that it had to learn how to adapt. It was used to, traditional warfare where the enemy was on the one side, and then you have the forces on the other side. So it was easy, who the enemy is. But now with asymmetric warfare.
Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us on the program. Dr. Kabir Adamu, CEO Beacon Consulting Limited, is my guest tonight, helping us get some perspectives on the recent spate of attacks on the Plateau, Benue, and Borno states. Dr. Adamu, thank you very much for staying with us. So before we lost connection with you, I was asking you this very fundamental question, because in analyzing this recent spate of attacks in Borno state, is there a possibility that the recent closure of all official displacement camps in Maiduguri may have led to this fresh wave of violence? Because as at the time the report surfaced, some residents of the state saying the forceful relocations have also been faulted for the lack of consultation with development organizations, human rights groups. Critics argue that the plan has so far been focused more on the dream of economic revitalization rather than protecting the rights and well-being of IDPs. And I'm here wondering how serious that is and could have contributed to this fresh wave of attacks.
Yeah, so I mean, before technology interrupted our conversation, I was making the point that our military were competent, but I was also making the point that there are other factors, and I was talking about the geopolitical component. There is a lot of international and foreign influence in the counterterrorism as well as the terrorism operation. So discussing IDP camps, the closure of IDP camps and resettlement by the governor, that issue has generated a lot of discussions and controversies. And the state government is very clear about its intention. It has explained why it wants to close all IDP camps and resettle populations. And it has engaged with our international partners to explain to them. I know not all of them supported the state government, but for God's sake, it's our country. And this is what the state deemed is best for its people. It has generated adequate engagement and has gotten the support of the majority of the people in that regard. So the onus is on us to support that objective. And any detractor, and in this instance, I believe there are several detractors, including the two major groups, terrorist groups that are active in the Northeast, the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah al-Dawati wal-Jihad and the Islamic State in West Africa province. They wouldn't want that resettlement, and I'll explain why. There are strategic locations in the state. Those locations are strategic. For the military, they're strategic because they allow the military to carry out, to control certain locations and then carry out operations. It allows them to enable reinforcement and several other reasons why they are strategic for the military. There are also strategic reasons for the state, but then there are also strategic reasons for the bad guys. So as an example, access to the two major forests, Sambisa and then the Alagano forest, access to the border communities. They wouldn't want people to return to those locations. They will frustrate everything the government wants to do to return to that. So are we going to allow them, or are we going to now bring our national force together to support the state government, allow the resettlement, and then deal with whoever it is that wants to stop it? Let's not forget that there are foreign actors too who may not want that resettlement because of the strategic objectives that they're trying to achieve in that region. So I do understand all of this could be factors why we're seeing the resurgence, but the bottom line is that the groups that are behind the resurgence are being engineered, and that engineering is happening through statements coming from abroad. And I've mentioned that. We've monitored those statements, one in January, the other one in March. And we immediately after the statements, we saw a resurgence of those attacks. So what am I trying to say? Our counter-terrorism operation, and earlier on, I did mention to you that we have 3 instruments. Those instruments, when they were created, the idea was to have an all-of-government approach and an all-of-society approach. It wasn't meant to be a military approach alone. So in this instance, why don't we encourage local participation, especially in intelligence gathering and in resilience building, recruitment? If we build our de-radicalization and counter-radicalization component of those 3 instruments, it will be very difficult for those groups to recruit. But for some reasons, we're focusing more on the military approach and not giving emphasis to these other components contained in the instruments. Going forward, you asked me what ways. Let's emphasize the components of the 3 instruments that we have, so that the oxygen that allows the 2 groups to grow and to remain as resilient as they are, we can suffocate them, and then they would have a natural death very, very soon. But for as long as we don't do that, no matter the number of commanders that kill, we're likely to see the type of resurgence that we're seeing at the moment.
All right, Dr. Adamu, but would you say the situation in Borno State is very different from what we have on the Plateau and in Benue State?
In some instances, frankly, no. We're dealing with non-state armed groups who have shown the capacity to challenge the supremacy of the use of force by the state. The same thing is happening in Borno State. It's the same thing that is happening in Benue. It's the same thing that is happening in Plateau State. They're all non-state armed groups. Their dimensions are different. The methodology is slightly different. but the consequence is the same. They are challenging the supremacy of the use of force by the state. And I hate to say this, they are doing it successfully. Yes. And the more they do it successfully, the more they encourage other groups to continue. So to that extent, we're dealing with the same thing. Unless the state grows its capacity to reduce the ability of these non-state armed groups to challenge its supremacy of the use of force, then unfortunately, we're going to see more of such challenges.
Very sad to see that the killings on the Plateau have now become a norm, and the North Central region is now very unstable. But for Plateau State, the governor has called it ethnic cleansing. It calls it genocide. It says these are the activities of land grabbers. It says there are powerful persons responsible. And I must confess that scares me a lot to hear that allegedly there are some powerful persons somewhere sponsoring or funding violent attacks and deaths on poor Nigerians. Is this something you agree with? Because in your report, you say these killings reflected a pattern of ethnic-based violence, inflaming herder-farmer tensions.
Yes, to an extent, I do agree that a significant portion of the conflict in Plateau State is ethnic-based. It is also resource-based. But where I differ with His Excellency, the Governor, is the response of both the federal government and the state government. There are two major operations that are in place in Plateau State. Each of them is 15 years old. And so they are not babies, teenagers actually. Okay. And we have not subjected any of them to democratic oversight till date. One is Operation Safe Haven, which was created in 2010, and 2025, that makes it 15 years. It's expanded, and nobody has told us, as an example, what is the end game? What is the exit strategy of that operation? It was meant to be a stopgap operation. Now it has become embedded within the ecospace of Plateau State. The second one is Operation Rainbow, which is a state-based operation with several security forces involved. It has also become embedded within the ecospace of Plateau State. And sadly, in spite of these two operations, you still have non-state actors coming to the state and killing people in a manner that is annoying, that is embarrassing. Because, I mean, these people, from what we hear, come on motorbikes. And I challenge His Excellency, the Governor, give me the ability to support that state in 3 months and put in place a surveillance mechanism. We're not talking of ants. Even if there are ants, 80 ants together, you should be able to have the capability, a surveillance capability that can pick up 80 ants moving together. So to that extent, I believe that the state government can do better in arming, having a structure, a state-level security structure that would limit the ability of these groups to operate. And just to buttress my point, I recommend to His Excellency, the Governor, let him take a visit to his colleague in Lagos and sit down with his colleague in Lagos, just a day or even half a day, and tell his colleague in Lagos, please, I would like to study what you have in place in terms of the structures, state-level structures, now not federal-level structures, for managing security. Let me just give you an example. You are in Lagos State. Your colleagues have covered the activities of the Command and Control Center in Lagos State. I doubt if we have anything near that in Plateau State. Yet the challenges in Plateau State are bigger than the challenges in Lagos. So this is the point I'm making. We know the enemy. Nobody is in doubt about who the enemy is. For the past 15 years, since Operation Safe Haven and Operation Rainbow have been in place in Plateau State, enemy is known. What we have stopped and we haven't done as a country is to deal a death blow to that enemy. And it can be done if the state government can create structures for public security to support the federal structures, if we can enhance civilian oversight on the existing security operations and sit down and ask critical questions. I mentioned as an example, what is the exit strategy for these operations? How are they being managed? The funding for them, what are they being used for? How come we still have this enemy able to come in, kill people, and then leave? And
Absolutely.
Not one person has been arrested. Not one motorcycle has been arrested. I mean, for God's sake, motorcycles cannot be buried under the sand. They move. And then in today's world, believe me, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, you put 10 kids who have GIS capabilities, I repeat, 10 kids with GIS capabilities, they can use the heat wave of those motorcycles to tell you where they emanated from and where they went to. So what are we talking about? When I hear the governor speak about, genocide and all of that, I see a shaking of responsibility. I see a wrong person. I want to see our leaders taking up responsibility and dealing with the problem. We elected them to deal with the problem, not to give excuses for X, Y, Z. And this also, to an extent, goes to the federal government. This issue is known. Nobody is in doubt about the issue. And we need someone to deal with it. We've elected representatives to deal with it. And I would want to see a situation where they deal with it.
Thank you for going there, Dr. Adamu, because it's interesting to hear you advocate for a review of these operations, particularly Operation Rainbow, because I remember when Governor Mothwang assumed power, he promised to rejuvenate the security network. But has there really been any changes since then? Would you say, can we categorically say these local security outfit is well equipped to cater to the security needs of the people of Plateau State? But also, let me ask you, is it possible that there is a terrorist enclave within these communities that perhaps the state government isn't aware of or difficult to locate?
The first part of your question on whether the state level security platforms are adequately equipped, the answer is no. I believe that they are not adequately equipped. I've given you an example. The Lagos platforms, I doubt if we have anything near that in Plateau State. The structures have been created. He has, persons he has appointed with responsibility for security. There are operations in place, but that's political. The structure that would allow these appointments to operate would need to be implemented. I gave you the example of a command and control center. In Lagos State, as an example, in one room, in the TVC, the Command and Control Center, you have up to 50 computers with young persons manning those computers, telecenters with distress call capabilities that are functional, and you can try it. You're in Lagos, but do those things exist in Plateau State? So you can't perform, out of nothing. You have to create the structures. You have to allow the persons you've appointed. Plateau State has peace commissions, but I doubt if those peace commissions are being funded adequately. We've had a previous governor who came on air and apologized on behalf of the atrocities that were committed previously. But then since then, what has happened? Peace building is a process. It has to be invested in.
And there is also a peace building agency in Plateau State.
Yeah, exactly. So there are several structures that have been created, but my point is those structures are not adequately funded, and they do not have the structure, the support systems to allow them to function properly. When you create such a commission, there are several ingredients. Let me give you another example: the early warning systems and early response systems. These are all part of a public security system. If the state is serious about investing in security, it's not about buying vehicles. It's not about buying motorcycles. It's not about buying Dane guns and giving it to state-level security structures. It's about creating these different levels. At the last count, I'm a consultant. I don't want to give everything on here. At the last count, there are 6 structures that would need to be created to have an adequate state-level security structure. So again, I've given a tip. He can go to Lagos, sit with his colleague, and ask critical questions around how is Lagos doing it. Lagos is more of a metropolitan center, has more urban challenges, but yet you don't have the kind of threats that you have in Plateau State. Yes, the geography is different, the topography is different, and so you need a different kind of systems in terms of the hardware to manage, especially surveillance as an example. But
Dr. Adamu, are you there? So earlier you highlighted the importance of community engagement, the role of traditional institutions, religious leaders, community elders. The youths cannot be overemphasized in maintaining peace and security on the plateau. But let's talk about local saboteurs. Because the governor had insinuated that when the security personnel arrest some suspects, they end up being released after arrest. All right, you may answer the question when we come back from this break. Please stay with us, everyone. Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us on the program. Dr. Kabiru Adamu, CEO Beacon Consulting Limited, is my guest tonight as we continue to look for lasting solutions to banditry and terrorism in northern Nigeria. Thank you so much for staying with us on the program. Dr. Adamu, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
So earlier you highlighted the importance of community engagement, the role of traditional institutions, religious leaders, community elders, the youths, people like that cannot be overemphasized in maintaining peace and security of any community or in any community. But let's talk about local saboteurs who continue to connive with these terrorists. The governor had insinuated that when the security personnel arrest some suspects, they end up being released after arrest. Courtesy of these powerful persons, they end up being released back into the society. Is this the result of a weak justice system?
Yeah, so a weak justice system is part of the challenges that lead to insecurity in the country. When we're looking at these challenges, we have to look at a lot of things. There are what we call drivers, and there are what we call triggers. A weak justice system is a driver. When people can't get justice, sometimes, unfortunately, they resort to force, arming themselves and then taking that over. And sadly, the criminal justice system in Nigeria, as you very well know, is challenged. We have, to my knowledge, 3 components of that criminal justice system: the law enforcement component, the judiciary component, and then the custodial center component. I mean, the challenges facing all these 3 is well documented. There is none of them at the moment that is not undergoing one form of the reform or other. And so while that reform is ongoing, sadly, we see more people resorting to violence, as it were, to exact vengeance. And I think this is part of the challenge in several parts of the country. And the saddest part is that it's not just the formal justice system, even traditional justice system has been affected. And it's so sad that even what we consider transitional justice system, that used to be very functional in our rural communities, sadly, in today's Nigeria, even that has collapsed. And so when we're giving solutions, we need to also look at all of these elements. I mean, in the course of our conversation, we've looked at different things. And so when we're talking solutions, it cannot be just one thing. It has to be a combination of all of these factors.
Talking about solutions, Dr. Adamu, the IGP, Kade Gbetokun, has ordered immediate and comprehensive deployment of police tactical assets to the affected areas in the states. The police is talking about, the police IG rather, is talking about this critical intervention with significant reinforcement, including additional units of highly trained tactical personnel, state-of-the-art drones for enhanced surveillance, armored personnel carriers, units of police mobile force, helicopters, specialized platoons from the SIS. Is it about the numbers of deployed personnel, military equipment, or strategic operations? What must change?
A lot needs to be changed. And yes, we need improved, the capability and numbers. But what is even more important?
But do we have the numbers, Dr. Adam?
I think we do. It's how we're using the numbers. I mean, I just left a function today, and when I came out of the function, I was marveled at the number of security personnel that were in front of the building, because of course there were dignitaries in that building. The point is, how come you have that deployment in urban centers, but as you go down into the villages, you don't have that deployment? Have we capitalized? Have we turned security into a capitalist venture where only the rich and those who can afford it would now have security, but our villagers, unfortunately, we're living to the mercy of this bad guy? But we need to address that. We don't need these high numbers in the urban centers. We need to make sure that there is adequate presence. And if, as a country, we need to take a decision if we want to decentralize policing, and I'm using the word carefully. I'm using decentralization. I'm not talking of state policing. If you want to decentralize policing, we need to take that decision. So the National Assembly would need to move fast on this issue of whether to decentralize or not to decentralize policing. But we need to improve the presence of security personnel in our villages. We also need light forces with rapid response capabilities, because sometimes you don't even need them stationed in a particular place. You just need to know that they can deploy from point A to point B in less than 10 minutes, and that's fine enough. The enemy cannot fly. The enemy moves on ground, and so you can deploy speedily within 10 minutes to a particular location. Right. It means you can meet the enemy and address them.
Right. So, I remember... Okay, please land.
Yes, I was going to say that it's not just policing. one major issue that we need to deal with in Plateau State is that we need to title the land. If the conversation is around land grabbing, for God's sake, the best way to address land grabbing is to title that land. So what is limiting or stopping the state government from titling that land? This argument keeps on coming up, land grabbing. So why don't you just keep ownership? Whoever owns that land, title it, let the person know it's his or her land, and then even if the person is driven away from that land by whoever it is, as long as he has evidence that he owns that land, he can come back and claim that land. So, I mean, let's go ahead. Let's stop the bulk passing and the blame game and whatever. Let's be inventive. GIS, like I mentioned, can do a lot for us in today's world. Apart from GIS, there are several other technologies that we can adopt to address some of the challenges that are the drivers. If I start talking about the drivers, I don't think the time we have allotted for this program will be enough. But my point need to be methodical in managing the solution. We can't be complaining.
All right, Dr. Adamu, I mean, I also remember that, the December 2023 Christmas Eve massacre on the Plateau. CDS Christopher Bosa excused the Army's lack of intelligence capability on the basis that the attackers selected remote areas difficult for the soldiers to access quickly, even when informed of ongoing attacks. Do you think that to a very large extent, this is a situation where non-state actors are challenging the supremacy of government and doing it successfully because no one has been held accountable or no deterrent that will forcefully make them stop this act across the country?
Yes, I agree, and I said it earlier on that this is the situation. It's the same thing in Borno State, it's the same in Benue, it's the same in Plateau State, it's the same in Sokoto, same in Kebbi, it's the same in Katsina and Zamfara. These are non-state actors that are challenging the supremacy of the use of force by the state. Sadly, they're doing it successfully. So we need to make sure we turn that tide, where we are able to stop them, where we're able to prosecute them publicly, so that it sends a deterrence message to them.
So also, when people say it's high time Plateau people will defend themselves, is this even realistic? Can they really defend themselves against these terrorists who go about with highly sophisticated weapons?
So whoever says that is assuming, for instance, that there are outsiders who are coming in to do that. What if, for instance, the person coming in to do it are not outsiders? What if, for instance, persons are living within the Plateau? As far as I know, Plateau State at the moment is one of the most securitized environment anywhere in the world. There are local factories for fabricating weapons on all sides. There are militias that exist. So the securitization has already happened. We may not admit publicly, but it has already happened. You can buy weapons in Plateau State. The police have recovered several factories that are making even AK-47 in Plateau State and all of that. So I don't think it's a case of arming. It's a case of understanding those drivers. I've given you one, which is land, the issue of land. We need to title those lands immediately. It's also a case of enhancing the justice system. It's also another case of peace-building mechanisms. Let people move on from whatever hurt that has occurred in the past and learn to live in peace among themselves, whatever the barriers are. If there are economic barriers, then let's address the economic challenges. If it's a youth unemployment, let's start skill acquisition and some capital granting to those youths and to allow them to be gainfully employed, so that bad guys don't recruit them. But it's not just about force. There are several components that would need to be addressed.
All right, Dr. Adamu. So what more can be done to secure Benue State?
The case of Benue, to an extent, is the same, like that of Plateau, resource-based, identity-based. And of course, we've talked about the justice system that is failing to punish offenders. I believe that in both states, it's a case of peace building. It's a case of enhancing public security. It's a case of strengthening the justice system. But more importantly, it's also a case of the state strengthening its security architecture. Both governors should visit. In fact, not just the two governors of the North Central states. We haven't spoken about the Northwest. Just like I showed in our report, the Northwest, people are being killed in the Northwest and the North Central part of Nigeria. So
Absolutely.
the governors
I'm making reference to that report, Dr. Adamu. You made reference to the Northeast and the use of improvised explosive devices as attack vectors were sustained by ideological NSAGS over the review period, including along the Bill Road. You talked about Maiduguri Damaturu Road and along Munguno Garijam Road. Please expatiate on this, addressing the threat posed by IEDs in Nigeria, recognizing the urgent need to strengthen counter-IED efforts in the country. Has there been enough effort on the part of governments?
So I believe that there is a need to do more. I know that in the previous administration, there used to exist a committee that was domiciled in the office of the National Security Advisor that had the responsibility for tracking and managing the movement of materials that were being used for IED making. And part of what those materials were used for is they put them together to create the IED. So if you don't track their movement, if you allow anyone to go into the market and buy those materials, then we're likely to continue to see that. And let's remember that one of the methods of the delivery of the IEDs that we're seeing is UAVs, drones. At the moment, it's been shown clearly that the non-state armed groups, they've been able to contrive IEDs on drones and then to deploy them. They've not perfected the technology, so that's why we're not seeing deaths from it. But with time, they're likely to perfect that technology. So the earlier we start thinking of anti-drone measures to prevent that, the better for us. That committee, I'm not aware whether that committee is still in existence. If it's not, I believe it needs to be reconstituted. It needs to start sitting like yesterday, immediately, so that they start tracking, materials. As an example, at that time, one of the materials were dynamites that were being used for commercial purposes in terms of excavation, in terms of all the other mining components and construction components. So it's very important, as an example, to work with different stakeholders to understand the needs of those stakeholders, to make sure that you have eyes in those industries, to make sure that those industries understand what you are trying to achieve so that they support you. At the end of the day, it takes us back to my earlier statement. Counterterrorism has to be whole of government, it has to be the whole of society. The architects of the three instruments that we have for counterterrorism designed it like that. So we need to go back to those three instruments and make sure we have a whole of government and a whole of society approach.
So having gone through those reports, I must say this is highly comprehensive. Well done, Dr. Adabu. But I also see that you have security reports on some states in the southwest. So let's talk about it. So in those states which has been in the news because of this surge in criminality and killings, the state has always been a flashpoint. So this is not an entirely new development, but a turning point for many was a huge investment that went into securing the states. I mean, with Amatekun, it was a way to curb the growing trend of insecurity by the late governor, which evidently arrested the situation. Why do you think there is a setback?
So first off, the creation of Amatekun was meant to support just one component of the security stream, which is surveillance and intelligence. Remember, there was a lot of discussion before Amatekun was created on what their authority, their powers could be like that. And then it was agreed at the point that they can only be engaged in surveillance activities, and they can arrest, but they can never prosecute. They can't hold certain categories of weapons and all of that. So there is just a limit to what they can do. And because on those states sharing borders with one of the worrisome locations, Kogi State is a hub. There is a particular part of Kogi State that has been proven to be a central hub for some of the terrorist groups. And so the possibility of them mobilities between whatever structure exists in Kogi State and on those states, and then of course between and other states in the southwest, we are likely to see incursions like the type that we've seen in the past. Criminals don't care about borders. They see opportunity and then they go after that opportunity. Sometimes the opportunity could be political, other times it could be economic, other times it could be social, certainly.
So probably in our next conversation, we'll talk about the Southwest regions and what you think the Southwest governors must do differently this time. But I must thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening. CEO Beacon Consulting Limited, Dr. Kabiru Adamu, thank you so much for your time. Please have a great night.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But before we go, let's tell you that the views or reactions of our resource persons are theirs and have no connection with TVC News. Meanwhile, you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. Get in touch with us on our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and X at TVC News NG and at Olajumoke using the hashtag Politics Tonight. They're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatunji.